শুভ সন্ধ্যা। বিস্তার চিটাগং আর্টস কমপ্লেক্স আয়োজিত চলচ্চিত্র বিষয়ক সাপ্তাহিক অনুষ্ঠান বীক্ষণ ও বাহাসের 46তম পর্বে আপনাদের স্বাগত জানাই। আমাদের এই পর্বের অতিথি আমাদের সবারই অত্যন্ত প্রিয় এবং পরিচিত মুখ, চলচ্চিত্র নির্মাতা এবং শিক্ষক ক্যাথরিন মাসুদ। ক্যাথরিন মাসুদ মূলত মুক্তির গান ছবিটির জন্যই আমাদের কাছে এতটা পরিচিত এবং জনপ্রিয়। পাশাপাশি অবশ্যই সমকালীন আধুনিক বাংলাদেশি চলচ্চিত্রের একজন প্রধান কুশীলব প্রয়াত তারেক মাসুদের সহধর্মিণী হিসেবে। সহধর্মিণী কথাটি এই ক্ষেত্রে আমি অন্তত একেবারে আক্ষরিক অর্থেই ব্যবহার করছি। অর্থাৎ তারেক যা কিছু করেছে তার সবটুকুতে ছিল ক্যাথরিনের পূর্ণাঙ্গ অংশগ্রহণ। অর্থাৎ তারেকের চলচ্চিত্র বলতে আলাদা করে আমি তারেকের চলচ্চিত্র হিসেবে দেখি না। আমি মনে করি তারেক এবং ক্যাথরিন দুজনে মিলেই তাদের সমস্ত কাজ করেছে। বিশেষ করে নেপথ্যের কাজগুলো, কঠিন কাজগুলো, অপ্রিয় কাজগুলো হাসি মুখে সম্পাদন করেছে ক্যাথরিন। প্রযোজনা, অর্থায়ন, প্রচারণা, যোগাযোগ, তো আছেই আরেকটি বিশেষ কাজ। তারেক মাসুদের খানিকটা প্রযুক্তি ভীতি বা অনীহা ছিল, সেগুলো সব সামলাতো ক্যাথরিন নিজে। সে সাংঘাতিক দক্ষ যন্ত্রপাতি ইত্যাদিতে, এবং সে সম্পাদনার কাজও খুবই দক্ষ। মূল সম্পাদনার কাজটুকু ক্যাথরিনই করেছে। এর বাইরে চিত্রনাট্য লেখার কাজ, অর্থাৎ সব মিলিয়ে ক্যাথরিন এবং তারেকের প্রযোজনা হিসেবেই আমি এই কাজগুলোকে দেখে থাকি। তো আজকে আমরা তেমনি একজন একেবারেই খুব অভিজ্ঞ এবং খুব কুশলী চলচ্চিত্র নির্মাতা এবং শিক্ষক ক্যাথরিন মাসুদের জীবনের গল্প শুনবো। শিক্ষক এই অর্থে যে ক্যাথরিন কিন্তু চলচ্চিত্র নিয়ে প্রচুর বক্তৃতা দেওয়া, ক্লাস নেওয়া, কোর্স করা, শিক্ষকতা বাংলাদেশেও করেছে। এখন তো এটা তার পেশাই। আমি সে বিষয়ে আসছি, তার আগে আমি ছোট্ট করে একটা পরিচয় দিয়ে রাখতে চাই। ক্যাথরিন তো জন্মসূত্রে মার্কিন নাগরিক, যদিও বাংলাদেশের সঙ্গে তার একেবারে আত্মিক যোগাযোগ। যতটা না সে মার্কিন, তার চেয়ে বেশি সম্ভবত বাংলাদেশি। সে পড়াশোনা করেছে যুক্তরাষ্ট্রের একটি অত্যন্ত মর্যাদাপূর্ণ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, রোড আইল্যান্ড রাজ্যের ব্রাউন ইউনিভার্সিটিতে, এবং তার বিষয়টি ছিল ডেভেলপমেন্ট স্টাডিজ। সম্ভবত সেই কারণেই, সেই সূত্রেই তার বাংলাদেশে আগমন। এটা আমরা শুনবো তার মুখ থেকে একটু পরেই। এবং তার এই পড়াশোনা চলাকালীন 1 বছর সে ফ্রান্সেও কাটিয়েছিল। ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ লিওতে সে ছিল এক্সচেঞ্জ স্টুডেন্ট হিসেবে। পরবর্তীকালে ভার্মন্ট কলেজ অফ আর্টস থেকে, ফাইন আর্টস থেকে সে চলচ্চিত্র নিয়েও স্নাতকোত্তর পড়াশোনা করেছে এবং সেখান থেকে সনদ নিয়েছে সে। তো আজকে আমরা ক্যাথরিনের সেই সব অভিজ্ঞতার কথাই শুনবো, মূলত বাংলাদেশ পর্বটার কথাই শুনবো। এরপরে আমরা যাব তার মার্কিন পর্বের কথাও। সে এখন এই মুহূর্তে ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ কানেকটিকাট, সে যেখানে থাকে তার কাছে একটি বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ কানেকটিকাট স্টটসে, সেখানকার ডকুমেন্টারি ফিল্ম অ্যান্ড হিউম্যান রাইটস, এই ধরনের খুব বেশ মজার একটি বিষয় নিয়ে পড়ায়। ভিজুয়াল স্টোরি টেলিং, আর্কাইভিং, অ্যাক্টিভিজম থ্রু ডকুমেন্টারি ফিল্ম, এগুলো তার বিষয়, এবং সে সেখানকার শিক্ষক এবং অনেক ধরনের কোর্সে নিজেই সে উদ্ভাবন করেছে। এবং এর আগে 2013-তে সে সেখানকারই কাছাকাছি আরেকটি বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, আমহার্স্ট কলেজ, খুব বিখ্যাত আমহার্স্ট কলেজ, সেখানকার সে আর্টিস্ট রেসিডেন্স ছিল। পরবর্তী একটি বছর, 1 সেমিস্টার সে সেখানে পড়িয়েছে সে। আর বাংলাদেশে তো তার প্রচুর অভিজ্ঞতা রয়েছে পড়ানোর। আমাদের যে সিনেমা অ্যান্ড টেলিভিশন ইনস্টিটিউট, সেখানে নর্থ সাউথ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে, নিমকো ন্যাশনাল ইনস্টিটিউট অফ মাস কমিউনিকেশন, পাঠশালা সাউথ এশিয়ান ইনস্টিটিউট অফ মিডিয়া, সব জায়গাতেই তার কাজ রয়েছে। লেখালেখি করেছে, প্রচুর গবেষণা করেছে, সম্পাদনা। মানে ক্যাথরিন এক কথা একজন কর্মবীর। সে কাজ ছাড়া কিছু বোঝে না, একেবারে কাজের নেশা তার আর কি। এখন অনেক রকম কাজ করছে আর কি। তো আমরা সেই কথা শুনবো। তবে শুরুতে আমি আমার প্রয়াত বন্ধু তারেক মাসুদ, যার 10ম মৃত্যুবার্ষিকী এই 1 সপ্তাহ আগে আমরা অতিক্রম করে এলাম, 13 তারিখ। তারেক মাসুদ এবং তার সঙ্গে একই সঙ্গে মিশুক মনির, আমাদের আরেক বন্ধু, চলচ্চিত্র গ্রাহক, এবং তাদের আরো কয়েকজন সহযাত্রী, সহযোগী আমাদের কাছে বিদায় নিয়েছেন সেই 2011-তে একটি মর্মান্তিক দুর্ঘটনায়। আমি তাদের সবার প্রতি আমার শ্রদ্ধা এবং ভালোবাসা ব্যক্ত করে আজকের অনুষ্ঠান এখানে শুরু করছি। সো ক্যাথরিন, আর একটা ছোট্ট তথ্য দিয়ে রাখি যে আজকের অনুষ্ঠানটি ঠিক পুরোপুরি বাংলায় হবে না, কারণ ক্যাথরিন একসময় খুব ভালো বাংলা বলতো, কিন্তু দীর্ঘদিন অনেকদিন একটু দূরে থাকার কারণে তার সেই হয়তো আনুষ্ঠানিক বাংলাটি ওইভাবে আসছে না, ফলে মূলত সে ইংরেজিতেই বলবে, কিন্তু আমি নিশ্চিত জানি সে কথার তোর এক পর্যায়ে বাংলাও আসবে, ফলে এটা একটা বাংলা ইংরেজি মিশের অনুষ্ঠান হবে। আমি সঞ্চালনটাও বাংলাতেই করব, কিন্তু আমাকে হয়তো কখনো কখনো ইংরেজিতে তার সঙ্গে কথা বলতে হবে। সব মিলে একটি দ্বিভাষিক অনুষ্ঠান হবে, আপনারা সেটা একটু মেনে নেবেন। আর সবশেষে যথারীতি একটি মুক্ত আলোচনার আয়োজন রেখেছি। আপনারা যারা জুমে আসবেন বা যারা লাইভে দেখবেন, তারা যদি তার সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ করতে চান সরাসরি বা লিখে, আমরা সেই সুযোগটিও রাখবো, পরে একটি মুক্ত আলোচনা আয়োজন করবো আর কি। তো এই বলে আমি আমার সূচনা বক্তব্য শেষ করছি, এবং আমি ক্যাথরিনকে আনুষ্ঠানিকভাবে আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি আমাদের আজকের এই আন্তর্জাল মঞ্চে। ওয়েলকাম টু বিস্তার অনলাইন স্টেজ, ক্যাথরিন।
থ্যাংক ইউ আলাম তা আমি প্রথমত বলতে চাই আসলে আমাদের দর্শক মণ্ডলীর কাছে একটা ক্ষমা চাচ্ছি, কারণ আজকে মূলত বাধ্য হয়ে আমাকে একটু বেশি করে ইংরেজি বলতে হবে, কারণ আমার বাংলা একটু দুর্বল হয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, এই কারণের কারণে করোনার কারণে গত 2 বছরে বাংলাদেশে যাওয়া হয় না। আম, আহ, অথচ এই বছরে আলাম যেটা বলেছে যে আমাদের তারেক, তার 10ম মৃত্যুবার্ষিকী পার হয়ে গেছে। তার সাথে আমাদের ঘনিষ্ঠ বন্ধু মিশুক, আমরা হারিয়েছি মিশুককে। আর তার সাথে আমাদের আরো 3জন চলচ্চিত্র কর্মী আমাদের সাথে যারা ছিল সেই দিন, সেই মর্মান্তিক দিন, তারাও চলে গেছে। আহ, তো সেই তাদেরকে আমি স্মরণ করি। আর আম, আমার এবছরে আসলে বাংলাদেশে থাকতে খুবই ভালো লাগতো। আহ, তবে এই ধরনের প্রোগ্রামের মাধ্যমে আহ, মনে হচ্ছে যে আমি আপনাদের মাঝে আছি এবং খুব আনন্দ লাগছে এখানে থাকতে, সেই সূত্রে ভার্চুয়াল মাধ্যমে আপনাদের সাথে। So thank you, Alam, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be on this program. আমি জানি এটা দীর্ঘদিন চালাচ্ছেন এই প্রোগ্রামটি. So I'm very happy to be a part of it, and uh, I'm looking forward to talking about সেই পুরনো দিনগুলি এবং আমার এখনকার যে কাজ এখন এগিয়ে যাচ্ছে, চেষ্টা করছি সব এখনো।
All right, okay. We'll go as we move along, phase by phase.
Yes.
But I would like to start. I'd like to begin by hearing a little bit about your life story, like your family, your childhood, your growing up years, your youth, your education, etc. If you can share some of this information with our viewers and listeners. Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, in the Midwest in the United States, and on the South Side, which is a very tough part of the city. And I went, through the public schools there, and my mother didn't want us to feel any sense of privilege, although my background is somewhat privileged. I come from a family of politicians and explorers. My great-grandfather, Hiram Bingham, was the scientific discoverer of Machu Picchu, of the Incan civilization in South America, and he was a senator. And anyway, there are various prominent people in the past in the family. But, we had very ordinary kind of upbringing. And then I went on, as Alam mentioned, to study development economics at Brown University. My father was a professor of philosophy, and he passed away a few years ago. My mother is a family therapist. I have a brother also who is a professor of theoretical physics, so I guess it's not surprising that after everything, I've ended up being a professor myself. So when I got to college, I became very interested in Latin America, particularly. I traveled several times to Latin America to Mexico and Guatemala, El Salvador. This is during the time of the Civil War in that region.
Yeah, yeah. I read that during your senior years in your study, you have done some research on Guatemala, human rights abuse and activities in
Yes,
Guatemala, right? Yeah, if I know. Yeah.
yes, my senior dissertation, because I chose a very special major, actually. I was an interdisciplinary major, so I had to write a senior thesis, and the topic was human rights, the indigenous peoples movement for human rights in Guatemala. So I think that's sort of where my interest in, uh, global um, politics, international politics, and human rights began during that time. But at the same time, I also had a background in the fine arts. I had studied painting and originally had gone to college to be a fine arts major. But that sort of got derailed with my other growing interests in the world and human rights. But I did, as Allah mentioned, I spent a year in France as part of my studies. And during that time, I started to watch a lot of films because I was in a town called Lyon, and there were many very small film theaters, sort of, like film clubs around the city. And I used to just wander in, on any particular night to see what was playing. And in that way, I saw a lot of classic cinema, you know, uh, of the French New Wave and, the Italian neorealists. And it just got me very interested in cinema. And I wasn't really thinking of making films, but I was interested in the whole sort of creative process behind it, having had a kind of training in, visual media and visual arts. But again, that kind of went on the back burner, I would say, for some time.
All right. Yeah. Actually, I was, going to ask you that when and how your interest in cinema actually began to take root in your mind. So I got some clue, but I'd like to hear more about it later. But we'll switch to Bangladesh phase. I can very well understand and guess that your study in development economics may be a link with Bangladesh, but which actually triggered your trip, actual physical trip to Bangladesh? Do you remember? And how did you actually end up meeting your future soulmate, our dear friend Tariq Masood in Bangladesh? If you can, share that whole phase of your life.
Well, a lot of things that we can actually, in hindsight, seem like a straight path, but actually, many things happen just as a matter of chance. Kaktaliobabe on
Wow,
Kichule.
what a lovely word. Yeah, man. All
I
right,
like that
great.
word. I like that word.
Uh,
Um,
mhm.
so, actually, I didn't really know much about Bangladesh. I didn't really
Mhm.
study Bangladesh as part of my studies in development economics. My focus, as I said, was Latin America. But I had a professor who was my thesis advisor, and um, during the time that I was at Brown, I had founded a chapter of a national student organization called the Overseas Development Network that raised awareness about developing countries and their issues on campuses across the country. Um, and there was a certain amount of activism involved, and I actually organized a whole seminar on sub-Saharan Africa and the crisis in the Sahel, and so it was through that organization that I applied for an overseas internship with an NGO. But I actually wrote to many different countries and organizations that we had contacts for through this student organization. And I think there were a couple of them in Latin America. Of course, I spoke Spanish, so I thought that might be interesting. Then there was an opportunity in Zimbabwe, and then I had an interesting contact in Bangladesh. Actually, a few contacts there. So I got the most interesting response from Bangladesh.
Mm,
And I went to my professor and I said, Professor Whiting, what do you think I should do? Um, because I'm interested in Latin America, but I've gotten this very interesting response for an internship from Bangladesh. And he just looked through my papers, and it was maybe a 10-minute meeting. And he said, I think that this Bangladesh opportunity sounds like it's very interesting for you. And I wanted to be in a situation where I have a certain amount of freedom, to design my own course of work, and I wanted to do independent research also. And he was strongly encouraging me to take up that
mm,
possibility. And so that was how my decision was made to go to Bangladesh. And then, of course, before I went, I
mhm,
started to study Bangla. I read a lot of books about,
mm,
the history of the region. And I also found out some interesting family connections, I should mention. Two in particular. One, and you will like this, Alam. I think you know this story. So, my grandfather, after he graduated from law school from Yale in the early 1930s, he went on a world tour. And he was also writing for some different newspapers in the United States as he was traveling. And that tour took him through Europe, of course, first and foremost. And he met Mussolini, he traveled to Russia, met some, major leaders there. He was very interested, actually,
mm,
in the Soviet Union, and his politics were quite far to the left. Anyway, then he traveled down to Asia,
mhm,
and he was, very excited about the independence movement that was gaining strength there. Um, and and he met Nehru, and then he traveled to Bengal, and he met uh, Rabindranath Tagore
Oh
at
my
Shantiniketan.
God. Wow.
Yes.
Is there any written record of that meeting somewhere in
Yes, well,
journal or letter or
yes,
something like that?
there's a
Mhm.
journal which is kept at the Yale University Library about that whole trip.
Oh my
So,
God.
so I only found that out later. And the other connection is that his brother,
Mhm,
Jonathan Bingham, who at that, who at the time that I left for Bangladesh, I think he had retired, but he was a longtime congressman from New York,
mhm,
and a U.S. representative. And during the 1970 war, he was one of the key signatories to a bill proposing that the U.S. end all military support for Pakistan in
mhm,
protests against what was being done in the then East Pakistan. So he and Senator Ted Kennedy and a core group
mhm,
of liberal, Democrats in both the Senate and in the House of Representatives uh, proposed this bill. And it was a key piece of legislation, that helped to change the tide of public sentiment, particularly amongst elected representatives about the war, because by the time it was becoming clear
mhm,
what was going on with the flood of
mhm,
refugees in
mhm,
West Bengal. So I didn't know that either
mhm.
at the time, but that I made that split-second decision to go to Bangladesh. But then
Okay.
I found that there were these very interesting connections.
Mhm.
Um, so
But you
anyway,
got some response from Bangladesh. You said any particular organization or individual? Do you remember those?
yeah, well, it was there were a couple of small NGOs. I was interested in working for a smaller NGO, not a
Okay.
big
The
national
this
NGO.
okay,
I
multinational one.
actually had some colleagues
Mm.
in the organization who also went to Bangladesh with me, and they ended up working, all of them. There were four of them. They all went to work for Proshika.
All right, it's a
Um,
big one.
but yeah, a big one. And they were in Camilla mainly. But I was in Dhaka, and I was working for a very small organization called RIC, the Resource Integration Center, and later worked for another organization called the Center for Development Studies. Both
Mhm.
small
Okay.
NGOs,
Okay. Mm.
and really kind of support NGOs for even smaller village-based NGOs
Mhm.
around the country. Um, and for me, that was a perfect setting, in which to learn Bangla, first of all,
Right.
and
Mhm.
also to get a sense of what was happening locally in the field of development, which was I mean, quite narrow in focus. I mean, primarily it was focusing on family planning because that's where the money was coming from. And I had a very critical perspective on
in terms of family
NGO-led
planning?
development. And I mean, I would say I was quite, left in my politics, and I had a very cynical view of the actual development that was taking place. I should
And
add
I
that.
could see that protest and rebellion is in your gene. You have inherited this from your grandfathers and uncle, and so it's not
And
surprising. It's in your
yes,
family. Yeah.
so it was a very eye-opening experience, and actually, this organization RIC later was shut down. It was
Mm-hmm.
very controversial because the executive committee contained was made up mostly of members of Jashod.
All right.
Uh,
Yes. Okay. But
and it was through the people who were became my friends who were on that executive committee that I was introduced to a lot of people in leftist political parties that
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so not only Jashod
Mm-hmm.
but the Workers' Party and the Communist Party of Bangladesh, CPB.
Mm-hmm.
So
No, no,
that was.
it was a common phenomenon actually after the 75 killing of Bangabandhu and this turnover of our politics. Lot of progressive workers and left-leaning activists actually joined in many NGOs for their survival
Yes,
also. Mhm.
for survival purposes. But the thing, I mean, there were so I got a very quick introduction to the political situation in Bangladesh. It was during the Ershad's time, and so it was a very volatile time with a lot of hard dolls. Of course, since then we've seen many more volatile times in Bangladesh. But I was very curious. I asked a lot of questions. I wanted to understand what was going on. So there were many people I met. I remember going to the CPB office, and by that time they were starting to split.
89,
Communists and
the
yeah,
fallout of
communists and the Russians.
perestroika, glasnost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. তার
Mhm.
আগেও শুরু হয়েছে 89-এর আগেও শুরু হতে যাচ্ছিল so এই যে internal মারামারি সিপিবির মধ্যে and
Mhm.
অন্যান্য left পার্টির মধ্যেও
Mhm.
and I remember they all thought I was a CIA agent.
It was only natural though.
And they weren't the only
Okay.
ones, though. There are many other people like,
Okay.
why did she ask so many questions? She
Mhm.
must be, why did she learn Bangla so fast? Like,
So Tarek didn't come into scene yet, as of yet then, huh?
না আমি
No.
ইনফ্যাক্ট বাংলাদেশে আমি 1 বছর ছিলাম তারেকের
Oh,
সাথে পরিচয় হওয়ার আগে ঠিক
Agi, all
আছে
right. Okay, so you're talking
হ্যাঁ
about that period
হওয়ার
now.
আগে
Okay.
পর্যন্ত so by the time I met Tarek already I had been exposed to sort of many different facets of Bangladesh history and politics, and actually I think the person who was instrumental later in that first year period in introducing me to the arts, the cultural scene, was the poet Ahmed Sofa, and you know that story also, Alam.
Yeah. Yes.
But yes, I was introduced to Sofa Bai through one of my Jashod friends. Her name was Rosie, and she actually taught mathematics at Dhaka College, and so she introduced me to Sofabai, and Sofabai also first dismissed me. He thought I was a
You know,
just a stupid
white
American.
romantic.
Yeah, yeah, stupid American.
Okay.
um, but he was something of a romantic himself, I'll have to say. Anyways, so but then I guess we met a second time in Kolkata by chance, and we had a conversation about Tolstoy because I had recently read War and Peace, and then he decided maybe I knew a few things about literature, and so he decided that he wanted to have me for tea when I got back to Dhaka, and he lived in Farmgate at that time at 2 Indira Road.
Indira Road,
Uh,
yes. Mhm.
ইন্দিরা রোড,
Mhm.
একতলা একটা পুরনো ভাঙ্গাচোরা বাড়ি
Mhm.
যেটা বলা হতো people called it the Pagla Ghor, right? Because it was actually owned by a former minister from Sheikh Mujib's time, Bangabandhu's government time.
I think Mr. Mafis Chaudhry, I guess. So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
Dr.
Yes.
Mofis Chaudhry.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he actually, তার একটা বড় বাড়ি ছিল গুলশানে, বাট সে
Mhm.
পালায় আসতো ফার্ম
Mhm.
গেটে তার
Mhm.
পাগলা ঘরে, ওখানে বিভিন্ন শিল্পী সমাজ থেকে বিভিন্ন ওখানে কুয়াশার মতো ঘুরে ঘুরে যেত, হ্যাঁ, um, people from various walks of life and literature and music and the fine arts, and one of his one of the artists that he was cultivating and supporting was Sofabai. Sofabai was living there, in the front room, and in the back room there was another person who was living in that house at that time, and his name was Tariq Masood. So I didn't really know that. I just knew that Sofabai was there and that I had to come for tea that afternoon. And it was in July of 1987. And and when I get there, of course, there was a collection of people sitting around in the screened, sort of veranda part of the house, and Sofabai introduced me to Tarek, and he said, you must meet Tarek. He's making a film about a very famous painter.
Sultan.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sultan Bhai, yeah. And so, and Tarek was ready because Tarek had been told by Sohabai, look, I'm inviting an American woman over, a young woman today, and she may have lots of money. And you should definitely talk about your film with her because maybe she can help you with it. So, so Tarek, showed me the brochure that he'd published for the film, and said that he was working on an English version of it, and we got to talking, and I mean we continued to meet over the next several weeks and months because Sofabai every day would call me at the end of the workday and invite me to come over in the evening. So I lived in Lalmati at that time, so I just Manik Mia Avenue diye Shongshad Bharana Shamne diye ami chole ditam. And then I would stay there for several hours, and ওখানে আড্ডা চলতো ঘন্টা ভর ঘন্টা. It was very interesting, and I wish I had actually recorded it. That
Yeah, that's true.
unfortunately I was not so interested in preservation in those years, but yeah, it really is too bad that those conversations were not recorded, but they were very interesting, very inspiring, and so Tarek and I got to be good friends also, and that was how that
Okay.
introduction was made.
All right. Okay. So I think I made the right guess, because I knew that Tariq was struggling to finish his film Sultan at that time, and it was quite a long drawn project. But after meeting you in '87, he rather finished it rather quickly and came to US at '89 to
Well, it's
redo
no
the.
accident that he finished it
So
quickly.
yeah, yeah. So I would like to know that you must have played a role of catalyst, as a positive catalytical role, and what is that role really? What did you do? What was the magic that you have it done so
It was
quickly?
no magic.
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
a lot of work.
Hmm.
It was a lot of work. Okay, so well, I'd also met Sultan at that time, and Sultan
Okay.
Bhai, and
Hmm.
I was introduced to his paintings. Sofa Bhai took me to, see his work at the house of Abu Khailitu, and so I was very inspired,
Hmm.
by Sultan Bhai. Sultan Bhai invited me to visit him in Norail,
Hmm.
and coming from a painting background myself, it was particularly important. And by that time, I'd also started to take up my own work in drawing and painting as well in Bangladesh. So it was already kind of percolating, the artist in me was percolating. And then when I, met Tarek and became friends with him, before even we were romantically involved, I, was very interested in the film that he was doing on Sultan, and eventually, I became part of the post production. Tarek, by that time, had been working on the film for 5 years. It was stalled because he'd run out of money and steam, and he was very severely depressed about that situation. So, I think emotionally I played a role, also in inspiring him to take up the work again, but I also became uh, pretty much involved in the actual work of it as well, I should say. At first, Tarek wanted to protect me. Şey DFB Tajetto. And, ওখানে সেই পরিস্থিতির মধ্যে তাকে কাজ করতে হতো। I mean, of course, it was great that he had access to the facilities. It was supposed to be free for him to do the work there, but actually, অনেক ঘুষ টুস দিতে
Yeah.
হতো, and whiskey bottle ইত্যাদি এইভাবে কিন্তু তাকে কাজ করতে হতো সেই অবস্থার মধ্যে। He didn't want me to go there. He said, ওটা নোংরা জায়গা, তুমি ওখানে যাবে না, আমি যাচ্ছি, আমি রাত্রে এসে, I'll see you then. And one day I was like, I'm really curious. I want to see what you're doing. What is this about? And so he took me with him, and I walked into the editing room, and it was just full of pieces of film hanging from the walls, all over the tables, on the floor. And there was this machine, the editing machine. It's, a flatbed machine, as they call it, or a Steenbeck, with these rotating pans, where your audio magnetic tracks run in parallel to a visual track, which is the actual film. And I was fascinated. I was hooked. I was hooked from that day.
As I told
And
that you had a special knack for all this technology. Yeah.
And I sat behind the editor. His name was Nazrul Islam, and he'd never had any formal training in film. He was a cutter, as they say.
As I say.
And cutters don't get much respect in Bangladesh, in that part of the world, I think, at least in the government, labs. But he was quite proficient at what he did, and I watched his every move. And I figured out, how it worked. And when he fell ill, he had severe kidney disease, or liver disease, I think, and he couldn't work. Then Tarek was, up in arms. What are we going to do? We have to finish this film. And I said, well, I think I can run the machine.
All right. Okay.
And so I sat down and I started doing the work, and I can't really say I edited the film. It definitely, Nazrul Islam gets credit for that. But there was a lot of work to be done in terms of synchronizing the tracks, the fine cutting, and, then the negatives, had to be cut. So kind of overseeing that. And then we had to take all of the materials to India for the final post-production at the lab, because there's no decent lab facility in Bangladesh, particularly for 16 millimeter. And so Tarek and I went together with all of the film materials. And when we got to the lab in Madras, they said, we're going to have to recut your negatives. Because the joints are like explosions, one shot is overlapping another. And so we had to have all the negatives recut, and then we had to resync all of the audio. I mean, that was one thing. I mean, it took months. It took us 3 months to finish the film work in India, including also the sound mixing in Kolkata. And before that, we'd also had some final shooting in Bangladesh, and I helped to animate a title sequence, and so it was fun, but it was really hard work. And I'll have to say that financially, also in the end, Sophie was right, because almost the entire India phase of the post-production was financed by me from what was left of my college fund. But, be that as it may. I should also add, though, that before Sultan was finished, I had met Tarek, we'd fallen in love. I'd come back to the US for about 8 months or so. And then I came back again to Bangladesh to attend the first Bangladesh Short Film Festival, organized by the Short Film Forum.
It was 88 or?
It was in 1988, yes.
88, yes, I remember that.
And I brought a package of films of Robert Flaherty's. I brought Nanuga of the North and Louisiana Story for that festival. I had directly connected Flaherty's family here in the US, his daughter who lived in New Hampshire, and she arranged the prints for me from the Museum of Modern Art. And I also brought a package of films that had been made by the revolutionaries in El Salvador, the FMLN, and I brought those to the festival as well. So, and these were films that had been, how do we say, secretly taken out of El Salvador. So, at that time, the revolution was raging. But the short film festival itself was an incredible experience to witness that. And I
Mm,
would say that really sealed my,
mm.
dedication
Eight
to
in
cinema in
cinema.
Bangladesh. Just
Okay.
to understand the kind of impact it could
Mm,
potentially have. And
mm.
Alamgir Kabir was the chairman of the festival,
Right,
and then
right.
died just 1 month after the festival had concluded. So it was a very dramatic time, that whole period.
Exactly. No, it changed the whole course of modern Bangladeshi film, as you call it, parallel film. You have written articles on it later. We'll come back to it. But at 89, I guess you both of you moved to USA, New York, and we arranged the first show in New York, New School for Social Research. Our friend Salimullah Khan was studying there, and Nasr Ali Maun was there. So we did the first screening of Adam Surat in the New School for Social Research. And after that began another exciting and rather quite unexpected phase of her cinema life, that phase of Muktir Gan, that's very dramatic. So tell us about the process of discovery. How did you actually, discover this so much footages shot
Okay.
by Leah Levin during the Liberation War in 1971? And the process which followed it, this very arduous project, which I witnessed myself, to bring out a story from it within a whole real story behind it. And you came back to Bangladesh, screened it, and it created an uproar. It started the whole cinematic scene, whole political scene, and it actually brought about a change in our democratic process also, at least in terms of the spirit of liberation war, the rejuvenation of liberation war. It happened to that film. So this is another very significant, important phase of your life. So maybe you can, spend some time sharing that experience with our viewers and listeners now.
Well, yes, Alam, as you said, মানে আপনিও সাক্ষী ছিলেন সেই সময়ের কথা. But I will say that uh, you know, as অনেক কিছু কাকতালীয় ভাবে হয়ে যায়, but this is
Hmm.
also not an exception to that because my brother also had a role to play in
Acha,
the start, and you
acha,
may not know that story,
acha.
which is that.
By the way, there is a comment in live that Catherine to খুব সুন্দর বাংলা বলে. So tell her to speak more in Bangla. So feel free. You can shatter your shyness. You can just switch back and forth in Bangla and English. I
মাঝে
think.
মাঝে বলবো,
Oh, good God.
মাঝে মাঝে বলবো, ঠিক আছে?
Okay,
I'll
okay.
talk it, sometimes I'll speak Bangla, but it's difficult. কারণ অনেক কিছু মনে থাকে না কিভাবে
Okay.
বলবো, কোন
Yeah.
শব্দ ব্যবহার করবো।
Mm,
যাই হোক, আমার
mm,
so আমার
yes.
ভাই,
Mm,
my brother one
mm,
day, he was
mm-hmm.
in Princeton, New Jersey at that time, and he was walking down the street in the campus of Princeton University, and a woman in a sari approached him and with a tipora ekta mohila Bangladeshi. Bangladeshi na. He thought maybe she was Indian, he wasn't sure.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, she said, excuse me, where is the physics department? And of course, he knew where the physics department was.
Yeah.
And he said, it's over there. And then he thought, almost as an afterthought, he thought, maybe I should ask her where she's from. Maybe she's from Bangladesh, right? And so he asked her where she's from. She said, "Oh, yes, I'm from Bangladesh," with a bit of shyness, right? And he said, "Well, my brother-in-law is from Bangladesh." And she said, "Really? Who's your brother-in-law? What's his name?" And he said, "His name is Tarek Masood." And she said, "I know Tarek." And it just happened that this woman was none other than Milia Ali, Ziauddin Tarek
Tariq
Ali's
Ali's wife at
then
that time.
wife.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was just chance that he was the person she asked directions of. And
Oh my
so, of
God.
course, then this whole conversation started about, wait, okay,
Mm-hmm.
when are they coming? Because we lived in New York at that time, and we used to visit my brother regularly in Princeton on the weekend. So we arranged to have lunch with Tariq Bhai and Miliapa that weekend, the next weekend at their house. And so, Tariq's first cousin, Benu Bhai, was a very close friend of Tariq Bhai's. So there was much to talk about. And Tariq had grown, up. His youth was spent in a house in Mogbazar where Tariq Bhai and all of the other,
Freedom
friends of
fighters.
Anyway, yeah, from that time during the war in Mukti Shangrami Shilpi Songsta, that doll, She Shongskiki doll, Shodeshara Tarashto. So, they were in very close contact throughout that period, and Tarek knew Tarek Bhai quite well. So we ended up spending a long lunch with Tarek Ali, talking about all kinds of things. And at one point, just, out of the blue, Tariq Bhai said, "You know what? There's this fellow who took some pictures of us in 1971. His name's Lear Levin, and I haven't seen him for years and years. That was in 1990 that we were having this lunch with Tariq Bhai.
20 years, yeah.
And he said, I haven't seen him in 15 years or so, but he may still be alive and he may still be in New York. You should look him up. Maybe he has some interesting stories to tell, and maybe he can show you some of the stuff that he shot. I mean, in Tariq Bhai's view, it wasn't really that much. It was a little bit, but he'd never heard of the film or what had happened to it. So that's when we decided that we would, see if we could find Lear Levin. And there was no internet in those days. There was just a phone book. And we opened the phone book, like the following Saturday. And we're looking through it. And there are pages and pages of Levin because it's a very common
last name.
Last name. And finally we found a Lear Levin and Lear Levin Productions. We're like, this must be it. There was only one Lear Levin. There were many thousands of Levins, but only one Lear Levin. So we called him. We just made a cold call, and Tarek wanted me to do it, and I wanted him to do it. Finally, I said, "No, Tarek, you do it. I just can't. I just can't." I was feeling too embarrassed about it, and so Tarek called, and it was Saturday. We didn't think anybody would be there, and we called the office, the 11 Productions, and a man picks up the phone. Hello. And Tarek said, "Hello, I'm looking for a Mr. Lear Levin speaking." "Oh, well, my name is Tariq Masood. I'm a filmmaker from Bangladesh, and my first cousin was Benu, Mahmoud Rahman Benu. You may know him. And you may have met him in 1971. And he said, "Yes, I did. And I was there in 1971. And so Tariq said, "Well, I would like, to meet you since I'm a filmmaker. I'm very interested in the work that you did at that time." And he said famously, "I've been waiting 20 years for this phone call." That's what Lear Levin said.
Wow.
And so then we went to meet him, shortly thereafter, and it turned out that there were boxes and boxes of material, all labeled Bangladesh, in his basement. It was not an easy process, but we had to win Lear Levin's trust. We had to get a whole legal document put together, because it had to do with rights assignment, and Lear did not want to be responsible for anything that was said in the film that we were making, because we had complete creative freedom to make our own story, just using, his footage. So, all of that was clarified in this. And then we started work on it in 1991, and then it was 4.5 years really that it took us. We finally released the film in December of 1995, and most of that film was made in our little wooden house in Staten Island, New York. So we had no idea what was going to happen with it. Absolutely no idea. We were just focusing on getting it done, and it was a very, very painstaking process, as you know, Alam. People in Bangladesh were not witness to that. It seemed to them that it magically appeared at their doorstep, but actually it was a huge amount of work, and we had to collect materials not only from Lear Levin but from all over the world to tell the story that we eventually tried to tell through that film. And
I think we should. I think we should mention about your then landlord, Jonathan, because who actually just permitted the whole house at your disposal. Every room, one room is the editing machine, one room is all those clips, another room is this boxes. So he was an outsider, yeah. So that was the thing, and I shared that apartment for some time during that time. So I know what went actually behind this whole process of making the film. But tell us about the aftermath of when it was released in Bangladesh, and the kind of reception we received, experience and the audience response, and the whole the political atmosphere concerning the film and the liberation movement. So what was your realization, and what was your actually reaction to it?
Well, again, it was just a bizarre confluence of circumstance. I mean, Darek and I came back with the film in March or April, I guess, of 1995. We got the final prints. We brought four prints with us. Kota Chilo J. Habib Khan, who
Producer.
who was a Mul Dharar Cholochitro Produshok, a commercial producer. He said that he wanted to release the film. But once we got there, he started to get cold feet. We showed him some of the film, and as you know, the film
that was the time I think BNP was in power,
yes,
right? Yeah. Okay.
yes. I mean, it's not really about party politics per se, but I mean, it was the climate of the times, right?
Right, exactly.
Because there was a lot of suppression around the history of the Liberation War. And it was sort of it was leaning more towards Islamic, politics also. So that
Political Islam, to be more precise.
Political Islam,
Yeah.
exactly, political Islam, I should say. So the non-sectarian, the more tolerant ethos of the Liberation War was definitely being suppressed, right? That origin story was being suppressed. And this is really what Muktirgan was about, right? In its own way. And I think, it was a very politically charged time. Habib Khan, I think he got nervous about what was going to happen. And we had been counting on him investing money in the release of the film. And, he said that, look, I could help you with this, but you're not going to get a penny back from it, right? Whatever I do. And that was also a very discouraging for us because we'd put so much money into it. We had to spend over $100,000 to make that film. So we decided that we were just going to release it ourselves. And it was an almost impossible task to do that. But we had to start in only one venue, which was the public library, which is the historic venue of the Short Film Forum. And, Bikolpo Dhara Cholochitro Je Andolan, Okhane Kintu Stan হয়েছে মানে তাদের চলচ্চিত্র প্রদর্শনীর ক্ষেত্রে সেটা সবসময় একটা কেন্দ্র ছিল. So without any money, we had a team of volunteers, and we printed our own tickets, printed our own posters, begged and grabbed the feet of newspaper publishers to publish free ads in their newspaper. But I remember that first screening of the film. It was December 1st at the public library, and there were maybe 30 people in the audience, right? And it was very discouraging. But the one thing that happened was that after the film was over, people started crying uncontrollably.
Oh my God.
Because people just didn't know it, had no idea about it, right? I mean, there'd been a little bit of leka-leki here and there about it, but people didn't really know what it was, right? And so the next day there were like 100 people. And the next day there were like 500 people. And then it was within 4 or 5 days, it was out of control. I mean, it was thousands of people. The lines were going around the block, and we had to start having shows, from morning until midnight. It was just something that we had never, ever imagined, right? The way that it took off. It was just word of mouth, really. And there was so much demand. People wanted postcards. They wanted T-shirts. They wanted the soundtrack. So we furiously started, doing all of that work, like while we're running these shows, also putting together, a cassette master, and then designing the cover and getting that printed, and then, printing T-shirts and making all of these postcards from stills. I mean, it was just it was a huge explosion that took place. And then there was the media attention. I don't think I slept for months during that time. And simultaneously, the political situation was becoming more and more charged. And the film was becoming a part of that. And this was completely unintentional. I mean, we had never had any plan for this.
Because
I,
the election was coming up next year, yeah. So there
the
was
election was
there's a
coming up the next year,
uh,
and so people started coming to us and saying we want to show the film in our cinema hall, and so we started giving prints. The most difficult one during that time was the Cantonment Cinema Hall came to us. They wanted to show the film. And we were like, okay, you take the prints, and don't ask for any help from us, right? You just run it in your hall, and apparently the shows were absolutely sold out there, and that's when the situation got quite dicey for us. We had spent a long time with the film in the censor board. It had been stuck for 5 months. I didn't even mention that. But finally, we were able to get it out almost on a technicality without any cuts. And I don't think the censor board anticipated either what was going to happen with this. But after, the huge explosion of interest in the film, the articles that were being written, questioning why have we forgotten this? Why did we never know this? And that women were so involved that it was a secular movement.
And there were some personal anecdotes also, right? Someone from the audience identified her brother there in the refugee camp and began very emotional. So
yes. I mean, all of that
tension.
happened. We started filming the shows, and filming what people had to say about the film itself and just documenting it, right? Not knowing that later on this would become part of another film. But then there was a move from the Home Ministry to actually ban the film after its release. And so that was all very dramatic, and we knew something was in the works because there were a lot of special branch people milling about at the public library, and we were getting threatening, messages and things like that. And then we got word that somebody had leaked a letter that had been issued by the Home Ministry banning the film. It turned out later to have been an additional secretary who had done that. And so we had to lie low, while that whole thing blew up, because it was leaked. The letter was leaked to Border Kagoj. And Border Kagoj made a headline of it the next day. Koyekjon Montri Totpor. Muktir Gan ban kora jano, but I can't remember the exact headline. And the Border Kagoj, Bore, ওইটা কিন্তু চুরি করে নিয়ে গেছে সব distribution point থেকে, so that it couldn't be distributed. Although কপিগুলো তার আগে চলে গেছিল মফস্বলে, কিন্তু ঢাকা শহরে all of the copies were grabbed by these unmarked vans. They came to all the distribution centers and grabbed all the copies of Border Kagoj. তারপরের দিন, all the other newspapers carried a headline about the Border Kagoj having been grabbed and about the conspiracy to ban the film, the Shorajantro, and then we never got the letter.
I know there are lots of stories like
stories.
this.
I'm sorry, Alam. Endless stories.
Yeah, you could make another 2 or 3 films out of it. And actually, after that, you moved around the country on your own and showed the films in many different places. And that was another experience, and which gave ideas to make your next film, Muktir Kotha, Narir Kotha, and all those. But we are going to skip it for now. And but I would request you to write a book on this, though. Really, I think it's long.
Yeah, and I should also add, Alam.
Yeah,
I should also add, Alam, that actually they tried to throw me out of the country during that time.
Oh my God. Okay, so next I think we'll touch upon this Matir Moin, another great breakthrough, not just for you, for Bangladeshi cinema in the world, cinema scene. So it was released in Cannes Film Festival. It was awarded with quite a prestigious prize. So please share with us your joy and excitement of that very proud moment, which also made us proud. I remember that after a couple of years, maybe in Montreal, I was living in Montreal then, it was invited in the Montreal World Film Festival. You were there. It was released in a commercial hall, and we all went there next day to watch the movie. So it was a great, unforgettable experience for us also. Please share that part of the story of Matir Moina, the making of it, and the
Well,
response in the
Mario
Khan.
Moynihan making it was very humble
Mm,
again. You know,
mhm,
all of these things have very humble beginnings, right?
mm, mm,
It was a conversation Tarek and I had in Staten Island that, you know, one day it would be nice to make a film that was based on his childhood because
mm,
I always thought he had a really exceptionally unusual childhood experience, having been sent off to madrasa by his father and having been liberated from the madrasa during the Liberation War. So, you know, we had talked about it on and off over the years. And then we decided after Muktirgan and Muktir Kota that we would give it a shot. And so we started working on the script for that. And we were very lucky. Actually, we had been approached by the French embassy to apply for a fund called the South Fund, a very prestigious fund for international cinema. And so we took it very seriously and we started working on the screenplay for that. And then we eventually not only got the South Fund award, but we also were able to get a very famous French distributor as our co-producing partner and distributor, MK2. Um, and uh, so, you know, all of this just snowballed as we were planning the film. It really started to take off, and then in 2001 we started filming it, and it was a very difficult shoot because it's a seasonal film and it's a period film. So we had to shoot over a long span of
mm,
time.
mhm.
You know, Basha Shamoy onek drisho ase, and Shite Shamoy Kwasha drisho ase, jeta di chobi de shuru hoy, as well as, you know, other seasons, Gram Bangla drisho ase chobita. Chobite, and then the Noka Bais and so on. So there was a lot of, you know, very naturalistic scenery in the film that was very demanding to try to capture, but also all of the period details. So it took a tremendous amount of time and effort to get the shooting completed, and then you know, we were finishing the film, we were doing the editing of the film when September 11th happened, right? And I remember I was in our editing room in our office when I got news that a plane had hit one of the twin towers, and you know, incidentally, our roommate from Staten Island, who you might have met, Greg, he was killed in the September 11th attacks, but we didn't know that at the time. Anyway, that really changed the scenario for the film also. I mean, we hadn't planned, you know, on um, that kind of global attention on, you know, a film that dealt with something so specific as the, you know, the
Matir
world of
Moina.
madrasas
Mm,
in, you know, and also the film in some ways it tries to parse out the different strands of Islam, you
mm,
know,
mhm,
political Islam, you know,
mm.
versus sort of the popular Islam, right?
Yeah.
And
And
and then
there was that wonderful scene of Bahas, right? With the
and the
different
Bahas
Muslim.
and
Yes.
Marafuti Islam, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, so all of these, you know, different aspects, and then of course woven into the story is, you know, Boyatigan, you know, um, and sort of, you know, Baul sort
Bowl
of
spirits. Yeah.
Shangstriti and
Mm,
so on. And uh, because I think of September 11th, there was a lot more global interest in a film on this topic because people wanted to understand, right? And here was a film that actually painted a much more nuanced
yeah.
and in many ways positive also picture of, you know, it's a predominantly Muslim society.
Mm.
So I think, you know, the film really was able to achieve a global audience that way, but it was not intentional. We never did it.
No,
We
no,
never
of course.
made the film with
Yeah,
that
yeah,
in mind.
yeah. Right. Mm.
You know, there have been certain critiques in Bangladesh that, oh, you know, they made it for a Bangladeshi audience. No, it wasn't that. We actually made it for a Bangladeshi audience. That's why
And,
after Bhutan,
and it was quite an old project of Tariq. Tariq used to say all the time. He used to mention that I need to, you know,
yes,
bring that phase of my life, that madrasa period, into cinema in some form or other. So he has been
yes,
harboring this dream for a long time back. So Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm,
yes.
mhm,
But, I mean, it was quite a surprise when it was picked up, and, it was the opening film of the director's fortnight at Cannes, and then it won an award there, and then it, went to many other festivals and, won other awards as well. And but, in Bangladesh, we were not able to show it because it was banned. Right. And we
yes,
got the
that's the.
news that it was banned while we were in Bangladesh. I mean, while we were at Cannes.
Mhm.
And we didn't have any crew of news photographers from Bangladesh with us in Cannes, I should add. We were there on our own, right? And people didn't really know what was going on there at the festival when it was going on, but we got the news while we were there that the film had been banned in Bangladesh. And then, of course, all the news organizations, the BBC and New York Times and all the, they wanted us to play that up that it was banned. But we were like, no, listen, we have to deal with this. We have to go back and we
Mhm.
have to fight this,
Yeah. Mhm.
so we have to be diplomatic about it. I mean, so that was also a complication. Just with as with Muktirgan, right?
Mhm.
These things just suddenly happen,
Mhm.
and you have to deal with them.
Mhm.
So then when we came back to Bangladesh, Tarek particularly took the forefront of working on getting it unbanned, and we were able to finally do so. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, there was a big delay
Mhm.
for audiences in Bangladesh to see the film. And we had had a plan actually to make a nationwide release of the film.
Mhm.
We'd already been in touch with these distributors in different halls in Chittagong and Sylhet and other places. And then just a few weeks before that was to happen, there was a series of bombings of cinema halls around the
Yes,
country.
yes.
It may have been
2004.
coincidence.
Yeah, the
Yes,
serial bombing. Yeah. Mhm.
yes, it may have
In
been coincidence.
Dinajpur, Mymensingh, and different halls
Simon
were
Singh and all these
targeted.
places. Yeah,
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, and it was very tragic. It was horrific. And I think, that was one of the thoughts behind our film Runway that happened
Runaway.
later
Yeah,
on,
there is a
right?
scene also. Mhm. Mhm.
But at that time, it was devastating for us. But finally, we were able to release it again in a very limited way. But it still, had a tremendous audience response in Bangladesh, and a lot of madrasa
Mhm.
students
Mhm.
তারা আসতো আমাদের
Mhm.
hall ছবি দেখতে, and then we would talk with them afterwards, and they were just so excited, and they said, yeah, I could feel, the madrasa in the film, the smell of the madrasa. It was there on the screen. So it was a very diverse audience. And then Tariq took it on the road and showed it, in some places as well. But it was a very risky situation at that time. We could
Okay.
not do it to the
Mhm.
extent that we would have wanted to.
Mhm.
So
I was about to bring up the issue of runway, that it was, in a way, it was a precursor to that, because this bombing thing of cinema hall was literally shown in that film, Runaway. So
yes,
it was kind of a prophetic film, the issue have dealt with this, the extremist, Islamic extremists, the political Islam, and those, which turned out to be very true. And later on in Bangladesh, as you called it, Jongi Islam, and we have seen holy artisan and other phenomena. So, what actually made you to, foresee this scene in your film and take the risk? Is it something that you wanted to dispel the notion? You wanted to discourage the coming of this phenomena, or the youth, just showing the danger, the imminent danger of this kind of interpretation of Islam.
well, we had
So
been
what
feeling
about
it
it?
for
Yeah.
some time. I
Mhm,
mean, Alam, we had been feeling it for some time.
mhm,
Uh, we had felt under threat, from the time of Matir Moina.
mhm.
Uh, yes, I'm on call.
I think
Sorry.
there is a cyclone warning in Catherine's place, so she has to deal with that also. Please pardon this. Maybe she has to be distracted once in a while in between the conversation. But okay, carry on, yeah, Catherine. Yeah. Yeah. Feel free if you need
Yeah,
to go out and give them some candle or whatever, emergency supply.
yeah.
I understand. The
I
situation
know
there. Yeah.
আমাদের বাড়িতে সাইক্লোন আসতেছে মানে কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যে আসবে বুঝে যাবে। Uh, so where was I mean, it is something that we had
Yeah,
been
run
very
away.
much
Yeah.
aware of it for some time, and I think, Tarek, with his sensibilities, with his background, could also
Mm,
understand, the thinking, the thought process behind it. I mean, he had a very deep insight into that world, having, gone through 7 years of a
And
madrasa
that's
education, and a Qaumi madrasa at that.
mm,
I'm not to say that, Qaumi madrasas are hotbeds of, radical Islam. Not at all. Mostly they're not, but
mm,
there is an element, also, and the world had become increasingly divided right after September 11th and the wars in Afghanistan. And so definitely in that climate, Matir Moina, we felt the rise of political Islam in Bangladesh as well. And with the bombing of the cinema halls, we had become quite, sensitized. And so we had been thinking for some time about addressing this, the contemporary situation. Matir Moina looks at it, through the lens of 71, and the years leading up to that. But we wanted to look at through a more contemporary lens. Atacho, I guess, Runway was a 2009 film. Sorry, 2010. But we were talking about a period that was roughly around the early 2000s in the story. And we had also, the setting was very important, for us for that film. And we had lived in Uttora for many years, and have
yeah,
happened upon this place,
airport.
which is the end of the runway. It was a
Mm,
surreal kind of a situation there, where these massive, planes, 747s, were taking off and landing against this backdrop of,
mm,
kind of Gram Bangla, almost, at
mm,
that time, and sort of, shanties on the runway, and people selling, peanuts and candy
mm,
right at the fence, right
mhm,
at the end of the runway. Right, the cows are grazing, next to the runway
mm,
guide lights. So, this was also kind of a bizarre setting, the clash, in a sense, between, east and west, visually expressed also through the imagery, as kind of part of that underlying analysis of the film about the rise of Islam, political Islam, I should say. So um, so that's how the project kind of started, through a series of conversations and observations. And it was a different time. It was a different time. We were not so much under threat personally, and so we had enough space in which to make that film. I should add here, though, that all of these projects, Onto Jatra, Runway, smaller projects like Nora Shundur, these were all happening sort of, um, as interim projects, because our plan was to make a
was
sequel to
Kagoj,
Mahir Moina,
the
Kagoj Food.
Kagojet food, the
So
next
every
one. Yeah.
time we would make a film, like Runway or Onto Jatra or some other project, we'd be like, well, I think I say Apatoto eta kuri. Apatoto,
Mhm.
J2 আমার
Bec-
ফান পাচ্ছি না,
because
কাগজে
the
ফুলের জন্য আপাতত এই কাজটা করি।
Kagojiful was a grand project, right? It was involved in two, three different countries, period piece, and you have done a lot of research. I remember, it was.
আমরা আমরা ইনফ্যাক্ট সেই কাজটা আমরা শুরু করেছি, সে 2005
Yes.
2005 সাল
Mhm.
থেকে, বা 2006। So already by the time Runway কাজটা আমরা করলাম, already 5 বছর চলে গেছে যে আমরা কাগজে ফুলের কাজ আমরা করে
Mhm.
যাচ্ছি। ঠিক
Mhm.
আছে। আমাদের প্ল্যান ছিল যে 2009-2010-এর মধ্যে সে কাজটা আমরা শুরু করতে
শুরু
পারবো,
করতে
যেহেতু
পারবো।
আমরা পারিনি।
হ্যাঁ,
সুতরাং আমরা একটা smaller project like
ওকে,
Runway আমরা করলাম।
ওকে,
And I should also add here, Alam, that this was a time when we were having more and more collaboration again with Mishuk Munir, right?
yes.
Because Mishuk was very interested to continue doing cinematography work, even though he was based in Toronto.
Mm,
And so he would come back for visits to Bangladesh, and he would
mm,
say, I'm coming at this time, let's do something together.
mm, mhm,
So
mhm,
it was in this way that we did in Nora Shundur, for example, and then Runway also,
mm.
because he was visiting and he planned to come back and settle again permanently in
Right.
Dhaka. And then আমাদের প্ল্যান ছিল যে একসঙ্গে আমরা
Mhm.
কাগজের ফুলের কাজটা
Yeah.
করব
He did
together.
he did come back finally, that next year,
And
and
he did, he
he
did,
did,
he did.
and
Yes. Um,
you started this project of
and
Kagujet
we
Full
started
in
the
full
project together.
swing, you were went for the
And
location.
Mishu.
হুম, হুম,
অ্যান্ড মিশুকের সাথে দীর্ঘদিনের সম্পর্ক মানে
হুম,
আদম সুরাত থেকে
হুম,
নিয়ে শুরু
হুম,
করে
হুম, হুম,
that's of course Tarek's beginning is working with Mishuk
হুম, হুম,
but then also আমাদের পরবর্তী কাজ যেমন A Kind of Childhood অন্য শৈশবের কাজ
হুম,
আমাদের মুক্তির কথা কাজ
হুম, হুম,
এমনকি মুক্তির গানের কিছু প্যাচ শুটিং
হুম, হুম,
মিশুকও
হুম, হুম,
করেছে
হুম।
সেই
তো
রাতের যে ফাইট সিনটা
হ্যাঁ,
সেটা
হ্যাঁ,
কিন্তু সহ
রিক্রিয়েটেড
তারেক
হয়েছিল।
করেছে
হুম,
তো
হুম, হুম,
মানে on and off over the years
হুম,
আমরা
হুম,
মিশুকের সাথে আমরা কাজ করে আসছি and
হুম,
we were a trio. I mean
হুম,
we worked very well together, right? I had the
absolutely.
editorial eye
হুম,
and the storyboarding eye
হুম,
the visualization eye Tarek of course
all
was
the
had full
director.
direction and
হুম,
Mishuk was the
is
cinematographer but
cinematographer. Yeah.
it was a very
Yeah.
symbiotic relationship I would say
Yeah.
between the three of us.
Yes, but when it was all set, you're almost about to, take off. That fateful day, happened, and we lost both of them, Tariq and
Yes.
Mishuk, including three others. I don't know if you're interested to, say something about that particular day. If not, let us just go on to the update of Kagujit Full. What is the plan with Kagujit Full? Is it going to ever happen? What are the challenges? How can you think of a solution to it? But we'd like to really very much hear something about your feeling and your experience on that down the road beside them, if you can share.
Well, I mean, you can never predict these things, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Life is full of mysteries and sudden shifts, and I can only say that at that moment that it happened, at that moment, I knew that my life, my direction of my life, was completely changed, right? It was completely changed, and it would change me also, uh, irrevocably. That experience. So it's very hard to recover from something like that. And I actually suffered from PTSD for many years. I was able to get some very good treatment here in the United States because I had been, Tarek, of course, is my life partner. We just had a child together, but also we were creative partners. And Mishuk was very much a part of that team. And so I lost the two creative partnerships that were most important in the work that we were doing together in that moment. But not only that, I also lost three other close colleagues. Our car was destroyed. I was physically injured. I had damage to my eyes. I had to undergo four operations on my eyes.
Our
And
friend Dhali Al Mamun, the artist Dhali Al Mamun, has been badly injured.
Tali Al Mamun
Mhm.
was almost died, and Jolly, his wife, was also injured. It was a devastating impact, both physically and emotionally. But even then, people did not want to understand that. They did not want to understand what it was like to have gone through an experience like that. The media, the press, hounded me. When are
Mhm.
you going to make this film? When are you going to make this film?
Mhm.
I was under pressure from all quarters that I had to continue. And yet I had to, first of all, I had to
Mm.
I
Digest
had to
it. Yeah.
support my child. I was now a single parent.
Mm.
He was only 1 years old. I had all of my colleagues were shell shocked. I
Mm.
had to help them get through it. Tarek's family need a lot of support. I had no money. I had no place to live because I could not go back to my apartment. Within hours of the crash having taken place, the media was swarming through my apartment, taking pictures of my bedroom and my child. I mean, it was, I wasn't there. I
Mm.
couldn't go back to my house because I was in the hospital.
Yes.
Um,
Mm.
so it was absolutely brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And I must say I had a lot of anger also about that situation. But I should also say that I received a tremendous amount of support also from
Friends. Mhm. Mm.
friends and people I didn't even know. I mean, they wanted to help me. They wanted to um, in one way or another, they wanted to make it easier for me. And so that was also very important to have that kind of support. My mother and brother flew over from the United States. They were there the next day. Um, and, then for the next 3, 4 years, I stayed on in Bangladesh, right? I mean, people told me, it would have been fine if you just checked yourself into a mental hospital for the rest of your life. We would have
Yeah. Yeah.
understood. But I stayed on for 4 years until
Yeah.
2015 and continued to work.
Mm. And
And
unbelievably, you have actually, pulled together all your energy and all your courage to do a memorial meeting on Tariq. Just 10 days, maybe 10 or 12 days after in British Council. I was there, and it was a great occasion of expressing our tributes and love for Tariq. And after that, you have built an organization called Tariq Masood Memorial Trust single-handedly, and it is quite an active organization. It has built a memorial sculpture as a monument against this, the road accidents, as a reminder for the road safety. And we have done some memorial lectures, some
also books,
workshops, books, so
we have
all the
brought out
books.
books
So
and books,
tell
and
us,
I
tell
should
us, tell
say
us, tell us about your activities with
there
this
are three
memorial
books.
trust. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Mhm,
yes. So we brought out a number of books after Tarek died. The
mhm,
first one was called Cholachitra Jatra, a collection of his writings on cinema, and we're just bringing out a new version of this, a new
mhm,
Newton সংস্করণ এখন বেরোচ্ছে,
mhm,
with some new additions, also new writings that hadn't been included in the first. So it's actually really almost a new
mhm,
book in a way. And then we brought out Cholachitra Lekha, which was a collection of scripts
mhm,
and
mhm,
songs.
mhm.
Um,
And
and
that wonderful album, that the
oh
memorial
yes, I
meeting
don't
is
have that
Talks
with
and
me.
Leadership. That
Yes,
was also a very
that
good,
was based on
collection.
the memorial program. Yes,
Mhm,
Tarek Masood Jibono Shopno,
mhm.
and then Cholochicho Kota came out in
Very recently.
2019.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
that I don't know if you have a copy of this, but this is actually Tarek's Boktita or Shatkat Character
mhm,
collection.
mhm, mhm.
So I mean, the idea is that
And
Tarek.
but you have taken up other projects also, to keep his memory alive, keep his work going, and keep his dream, implemented.
Yes.
So tell us
Well,
about
and
those projects, like this the festival, film festival, some
yes,
workshops,
we
and
had the Tarek
the
Masood
scholarship
Utshov.
also. Yeah, scholarship.
Yes,
Yeah.
Tarek Masood Utshov, and then the Sholpadorgo মানে নতুন নির্মাতাদের জন্য একটা
Right.
প্রতিযোগিতা, চলচ্চিত্র
Mm,
প্রতিযোগিতা. We
mm,
had that for several years running. I mean, particularly when I was there, it was
mm,
easier to do those
mm,
things.
mhm.
That continued through 2015. And then we had photo exhibitions and book launchings and film launchings. Actually, we did do a number of productions, smaller productions, while I was working on, trying to get Kagojerful off the ground again. But we produced a documentary on Tarek. We also finished some
Pera,
of
I think, by Prashun Rahman.
Pera,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
by
yeah. I've seen
Proshin
that.
Rahman.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kanar Hat Bazar যে একটা music video that we had shot
Wow.
in
Mm.
2009, I believe. We finished that and launched that, and a number of other
And we brought
productions
out some
also.
DVD sets of Adam Suro. That is a
We
wonderful
brought out
package,
all
and
the
yeah.
DVDs of the
Mm,
films that hadn't been, because there was tremendous pressure to do this. So,
mm, mm,
we made a film about the making of Sriti Kota Runway, about the making of Runway.
mm.
We launched that as well. We brought out DVDs of Muktir Gan, Muktir Kota,
Adam
with
Surat.
subtitles.
Mhm,
Adam Surat was a
mm,
huge project.
mhm,
Um, and Runway DVD. So all of these we had to bring out, for the public. It was very important. So between the books and the DVDs and the festivals and the film competitions and the screenings all over the country for the first 1 or 2 years, also screenings countrywide
mhm,
in to memorialize Tarek, which we ran from the office,
mm,
the
mm, mm,
Memorial Trust office.
mhm.
I mean, I didn't sleep for 4 years,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
afterwards.
Mm. I think we should thank our young activists from Belatus and Mamun, also of the Moviana Film
Yes,
Society.
Movieana has been very
Had played a very
active,
active role in this. Yeah. Mm,
and Proshun. I mean, there's still a very active team, around this. In
working
fact,
around it. Yeah, yeah.
working on this,
Uh,
and particularly on the new version of Cholachitra Jatra,
mm,
Balait Hossein Mamoon and
mm.
Proshun Rahman and Nahid Masood have been very
His brother. Yeah,
instrumental as
yeah.
an editorial team in that. And
Mm-hmm.
also, Movieana Film Society continuing with TMMT to hold the Sharok Buktita every
Mm-hmm.
year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
all of these things have been really, really
Yeah.
important to keep, I think, the memory of Tarek alive, but also to keep him alive in a way because he
Yes.
had so much to say. He
Mm,
wasn't just a filmmaker; he was a thinker.
mm,
He was an activist.
yeah.
He worked for film policy. That was another thing that we did. We worked
Yeah,
around
you
film
have done
policy,
an extensive research on the film policy of Bangladesh and a road to
but
reform.
also
Yeah.
also
I'd like to hear
activists
about,
with
yeah,
pressurization on the
and
government and on
also
the industry.
save the cinema hall movement. Also,
Yes.
that's another one you've done. But in 2015, you finally came back to USA and embarked on a different life, professional life, to be honest. But that's also associated film. You've been teaching cinema in universities and designing courses, documentary based in documentary, human rights, and other activism, but always grounded in the reality of Bangladesh and your, hope of helping third world nations, developing countries, and disseminating progressive ideas through this film, archiving Armenian genocide, archiving footages, and all those. So tell us about this phase of your life, starting from like 2015. You have done that film studies in Vermont. You have taken up this job and have been doing all kinds of activism through documentary film. So share some experiences
Well,
with us about it.
it's a different life. It's a
Mhm.
very different life, Alam, than I had
Mhm.
thought that I would be living. I mean, if the crash, I should say, we don't use the word accident now, hadn't happened, then I would still be in Bangladesh, you know? And who knows what we would have done in these last 10 years. But my life was changed forever. And eventually I had to come home. My father was dying. He died in 2016. And then my stepfather was dying. He died in 2018. I had to look after them. My mother is now 86, so I've also had to take on that responsibility. So, eventually it was the family pressure that really made it imperative that I return to the United States. And so when I got here, I had to figure out what I was going to do, right? I couldn't just make films. It was too uncertain a future. Although I had some freelance projects, I decided to go back and get a master's in fine arts, an MFA. And I began teaching at the University of Connecticut while I was getting my degree. And then once I got my degree, I got a full time position as a professor there and teaching documentary and human rights, affiliated with the Human Rights Institute at the university, which is one of the leading institutes in the country, I might add. And doing work that is very much, I think, rooted also in my past experience in Bangladesh. That um, is definitely centered around issues of human rights and genocide and trauma and loss. And social and political conflict. I've been making a film also about my uncle who was a lawyer for the Black Panthers, who had to go underground for 13 years because he was on the run from the FBI.
Yeah, a double
So
life,
that's
a
been
double
a
life.
whole,
Your thesis film, right, for this
yeah,
master's
my
program.
thesis film. I'm
Hmm.
still working on that. But again, I mean, I think that all of that comes out of my experience of Bangladesh and the way in which cinematic storytelling is also tied to um, the storytelling around uh, national identity and um, and the politics and the social movements that define us, right? And that it's really it means nothing unless you're in conversation with the context in which you live. Right now I'm also working on a project with the Armenian community. There was the Armenians suffered a genocide in the early part of the 20th century, and many of them actually migrated to the United States after that, and they live with the kind of generational memory of genocide, much as people do in Bangladesh, right? Even if you weren't witness to it, 1971 is part of national collective memory, right? It's part of the collective conscious and unconscious, so to speak. So it is with other communities as well, like the Armenian community. So I'm doing a project this semester where we're going to be conducting oral history interviews with members of the community who are subsequent generations to the genocide, but they carry that memory even within them because it's been handed down from generation to generation. So I feel very privileged and very lucky to be able to do that kind of work that's close to my heart, even if I can't be in Bangladesh now because of the pandemic. I do have dreams of coming back to Bangladesh again
Mhm.
and doing
Mhm.
more work there, film work there, whether it's Kagoj or Fool or
Yeah,
something else.
yeah. But
But
you're
as
also virtually connected because just a few weeks back, I think you were part of this Liberation War Museum Doc Fest. You were a special guest there, and I met you online there also. I was a jury
not
of
only
that, and
that,
yeah,
not
also
only
yeah,
that,
many other events. I think you're associated
well,
with,
and
right? Yeah.
also
Mm, mm,
recently I was part of the International Genocide Scholars Convention, where I organized a panel actually on films on the Liberation War, with a
mhm,
focus on our films. And we brought together a group of panelists, most of them from Bangladesh,
mhm,
to talk
mhm,
about
mhm,
Muktijuddo Cholachitro and Muktir Gan and Muktir Kota, Matir Moina. And that was one of the central panels, actually, of this conference. So, I feel very privileged to sort of bring that story
mm,
that comes out of my own
mm,
experience and the films that we did,
mm.
to the wider world also. And I hope to continue doing
Yeah,
that in
and
whatever way I can.
you have also done that wonderful work with Friends of Bangladesh, like those who has helped us during this
Yes,
liberation
the
war.
archive.
That
Yes,
the
yes,
archive thing. That was also a great initiative. Okay, I think we are also running out of time, and
yes,
you need to go out and prepare for the impending cyclone. But I would like to touch upon the cinema of Bangladesh, which is our whole discussion is anchored around that one.
yes,
And while you were in Bangladesh, you have done many works around it. Like as we have mentioned, that you have done a research on the film policy of Bangladesh. You have written an
yes,
article, "Escape for Bollywood," on the parallel film of Bangladesh, that the movement of the Spikolpo cinema. You were part of South Asian Children's Cinema Forum. Also, you have done an extensive research on that. And finally, I have seen that you have written some paper on women filmmakers of Bangladesh. So, based on all these experiences, I'd like to just ask you, what was your findings about the cinema of Bangladesh, the ground reality? What was your observation? What was the recommendation? I'm pretty sure that those are still valid. And the situation didn't improve since then. Most likely it has worsened. So I'd like to hear from you your observation, your recommendation, your analysis of the overall cinema scene of Bangladesh and the way forward from here.
yeah. Well, when I was working in Bangladesh after 2011, we together, with a group of commercial and independent filmmakers, we were pressurizing the government at that time to come out with a new film policy. Having studied the situation in other parts of South Asia, India and Pakistan particularly, it was clear that Bangladesh was really lagging behind in reforming their policies around film. In particular, there was a very high government tax on cinema halls that was killing, the most important infrastructure of the film industry, which is its exhibition infrastructure. So we successfully lobbied the government to abolish that tax. But also, I mean, it was very important to have government investment and incentives for theaters to upgrade their facilities with digital projection, as the whole industry was switching over from celluloid to digital, and that's also been accelerated, in recent years now. So um, if some of that did take place, and it did help to a certain extent, I wasn't really able to do a follow-up study on what kind of positive impact that might have had. But the steamroll of technology is continuing no matter what we do, and it has made it much more possible now to make international standard, productions, have those production values with less money
Mhm.
in a financial investment in equipment. I think the main challenge in Bangladesh is the outreach, but as we've seen with the recent new Bangladeshi film that has gone to the Cannes Film Festival, which is wonderful news, and I think will inspire a whole new generation of filmmakers. those films you can make now, right? I mean, there is definitely technical know-how, there is the equipment, there is the talent to make those kinds of films. The question is, how
Yes.
do you really release them successfully? That's the real blockade, I think. India has been able to surmount that with a network of multiplex theaters around the country that can offer much more diverse genres of film that cater to more, educated, urban, middle class audiences. That kind of trend has been much slower to take place in Bangladesh, but that was what we were trying to incentivize, the establishment of those kind of theaters. You see that in Nepal even, and in Pakistan also, a much lesser extent in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh has lagged behind in the infrastructure of exhibition. New possibilities are opening up now with streaming, online streaming, but then how do you monetize that for the producers of cinema? These are the challenges now. And then, of course, in the time of a pandemic, having large gatherings of people even to see films is challenging. That's one other level of complexity to it. But I think in terms of the making, I think tremendous strides have been made, and there needs to be more, more collaborations, international collaborations, co-productions, not just with Europe or the United States, but also regionally, with countries like Korea that have very developed film industries. We need to really study those examples more and see, how it was possible. The role that film festivals have played is also really critical. The role that film education has played. I mean, that was another thing that we pushed for in the aftermath of the crash, was the establishment of a national film institute, which has happened. It started, at the initiative of the government and the prime minister, but the required infrastructure that you need to really make that viable has not been fully developed yet. So, those are all things that have to work together, right? It's not just the makers and the talent and the equipment and the know-how on the production end, but there's also, the educational aspect, and there's the exhibition aspect. I think, those two legs of that table need to really be developed much further, not in a haphazard fashion where you have a small institute here and there and elsewhere. Now Dhaka University has, a film and television program. That's great. And like I said, the Film Institute has been
There's some
established.
private universities also started opening
Yeah,
up film
you need
department.
more educators also, who are not just going to go into the classroom and tell stories about way back when, but they need to have, real skills, a real toolkit for teaching cinema. I think all of these things need to come together, to take the the industry bikolpo ba muldhara doesn't matter. I don't সেই বিভাজন আর করা হয় না, I think,
I don't think
to
we
the
need to
next
do that.
level.
Yeah, also.
I don't think we need to do that anymore. I think it's
Mhm.
all been equalized in some way. Rather, muldhara has become sort of bikolpo in certain places.
It has been marginalized, the lack
Yeah,
of
yeah,
cinema halls, lack of
yeah,
producers there. They're actually applying for government grants these days, for the
yeah,
film, which
yeah,
was actually intended for the Bikalbodhara only. Okay, go ahead,
yeah,
continue,
yeah.
continue.
Yeah, so I
Oh.
think, all of those things need to work together, but I'm very hopeful. I'm
Okay.
very optimistic that, there's a bright future lies ahead. It takes time. It does. I mean, you see the experiences of countries like Iran and South Korea. They started very small and it just sort of snowballed. Over the decades. So I think, Bangladesh can also learn a lot from those examples. But I think that tremendous strides have been made. And there are some, great film organizers, activists who are working. Film festival, organizers like the Children's Film Festival, I think, has brought a whole new generation of young filmmakers into that stream. And
Also, one thing I think you have noticed that a lot of young women are coming into film these days.
a lot
They,
of
yeah,
young
they're
women are
making
coming.
feature films, they're making documentary films, they're doing research, they're writing criticism. So they are promoting films. So there is a whole new force, women force in the cinema scene. And you have,
Yes, and
you have written a paper on the women filmmakers of Bangladesh. So what is your word of advice, or what is your
I don't think
take
they
on
need
the
my advice.
so what
I don't think
now,
they.
depending on your own experience, the struggle you have done, I think you have learned a lesson. Maybe if you want to share your lesson with them before we end. Yeah.
Well, again, I don't think they need my advice. I think they're figuring it out themselves, and sometimes you have to break away from. I worked with all male teams practically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to cultivate young women under me who were kind of my assistants, and some of them have gone on to do incredible work, like Elizabeth DaCosta now is
Yeah, the Bangla
won
South girl,
national awards with her
it's
documentary on
making
Bangla surf
waves.
girls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
literally, yes.
Yeah.
Um, and so but I think that many young women have realized that they need to form their own teams. They need to have their own sort of support networks amongst themselves. And I think that's more possible now that there are more of them to work together. I see
Mm-hmm.
that, in the United States, that actually my film is being supported through something called Women Make Movies, which supports women filmmakers, right? So there need to be organizations also that are specifically targeted to supporting women's film, that provide grants to films made by women. I think that needs to happen more at this stage. But I think that the filmmakers themselves
Mm-hmm.
are doing tremendous work.
Mm-hmm.
Rubaiyat Hussein is another.
Yeah.
There are many
Mm.
in the new
And
generation.
speaking about Rubaiyat, Rubaiyat is actually taken an initiative to encourage young women filmmakers. She's trying to actually nurture their talents also in this field,
Yes, yes.
actively supporting them.
Yes,
Mm.
yes, and I think having all women production teams is important,
Yeah. Mm.
because whether you like it or not. I mean, having being in a mixed team with men and women means that the women get undermined, right? And I face that also, but I'm not going to complain. But you don't get taken as seriously if you're a woman making a film or directing a film. And so it's helpful actually to bring together a team of women in the making process. But I think also teams of women need to come together in producing and in exhibiting, so that the entire stream from production through to exhibition is supported by a network of women. And you can also find grants internationally that are directed towards supporting women filmmakers. But I'm very hopeful.
Okay.
There's been some
Okay.
great work that's been done in the last 10 years, so they don't need my advice. I think
Okay,
they
so
figured it out.
we will end that on this very optimistic note that you're very hopeful, and Bangladeshi cinema will find its place in the world cinema map very soon, and the symptoms or the indications are quite visible all us around. So we'll take a break right now for a Q&A session. Although I don't see too many participants in Zoom, but I have received quite a few comments in our Facebook live, so I'll read those out for you. Those are in Bangla. আর আমি এখন আমাদের লাইভে যারা জুমে যারা আছেন দুজন আছেন একজনকে তুমি চেনো মাহিয়া আবরার my life partner, you met her in Montreal, remember one evening we
Yes,
spent our Deedan organization Sultan Ar Shopno, you and Tarek visited, including
yes.
Tanveer Mukawade, wonderful evening. She is here. I don't know if Mahia is interested to say something, to say hello to you, and also my close associate Mishuk Ehsan. He's also a filmmaker, but more a film enthusiast.
Arek
He's there
Mishuk.
also. Another Mishuk, yeah. So Mahia has turned her video
Hello,
on.
Maya. কেমন
Bolo,
আছেন?
Mahia, কিছু বলো ইকে।
ক্যাথরিন আপা কেমন আছেন? অনেকদিন পর আপনাকে দেখলাম।
হ্যাঁ, হ্যাঁ, আসলে অনেক বেশি দিন হয়ে গেছে।
হ্যাঁ,
হ্যাঁ।
সেটাই। আমি মুগ্ধ হয়ে শুনছিলাম আপনার কথা, আপনার জীবনের গল্প। আমি শুনতে শুনতে কান্না পাচ্ছে আমার। What a journey you had. ভালো থাকবেন আপনি।
থ্যাংক ইউ। আমি ঠিক আছে, চিন্তা করো না, আমি ভালো আছি। আমি ভালো
I know.
আছি।
Catherine is indomitable. Catherine ক্যাথরিনকে দমানোর সাধ্য কারো ক্ষমতা নেই। হ্যাঁ, আমরা ক্যাথরিনের কাছে ঋণী এবং আরো ঋণ তার কাছ থেকে আমাদের পাওয়ার রয়েছে। ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ মাহিয়া। আমি এখন একটু মিশুককে বলবো যে কিছু শেয়ার করার জন্য, তার অনুভূতি, তার কিছু কমেন্ট যদি থাকে ক্যাথরিনের জন্য। বলো মিশুক।
না, আসলে কমেন্ট নেই। ক্যাথরিন মাসুদকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ সময় দেওয়ার জন্য, তার ব্যস্ত সময় থেকে। বাংলায় বলছি, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই তো?
না,
না, কোনো সমস্যা নাই। না, আমার দুঃখ লাগছে যে আমি এতক্ষণ ইংরেজি বলে আসছি। আমার তো খুব খারাপ লাগছে।
না না
ক্ষমা চাচ্ছি।
না, কোনো অসুবিধা, তুমি ভালো বাংলা বলতে পারো, কিন্তু মানে বলতেই পারতে বাংলা, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, যথেষ্ট সুন্দর। কাকতালীয় শব্দটা যে সুন্দর করে ব্যবহার করলে তুমি। আচ্ছা মিশুক বলো, বাংলায় বলো, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, ভালোই বুঝতে পারে।
হ্যাঁ, সেটাই মন্ত্রমুগ্ধের মতন শুনছিলাম। এই যে মুক্তির গান বানানোর পেছনের ঘটনাটা শুনে খুবই অবাক লাগলো, এটা জানা ছিল না, জানলাম। সে সময়কার অবস্থা সম্পর্কেও কিছুটা অবগত হলাম, এবং তার যে জার্নিটা, এটা মানে আসলে কি বলে, এটা বাকরুদ্ধ হয়ে যাওয়ার মতো, মানে কথা হারিয়ে যায়। এটা মন্তব্য করাটা আসলে খুবই টাফ, বা অনুভূতি ব্যক্ত করাটাও। আর হচ্ছে যে অনেক দিনের ইচ্ছা ছিল যে ক্যাথরিন মাসুদকে সামনাসামনি দেখার, হয়ে ওঠেনি কখনোই। আজকে জুমের কারণে দেখা হয়ে গেল। খুবই ভালো লাগছে যে তাকে দেখতে পেলাম শেষ পর্যন্ত। আহ এটাই, আমি আসলে আসলে কথা খুঁজে পাচ্ছি না, মানে ওনার মতন একজন মানুষকে কি জিজ্ঞেস করবো, কি বলবো, এটা খুঁজে পাচ্ছি না সেটাই।
না, ঠিক আছে। থ্যাংক ইউ, থ্যাংক ইউ। আমার খুবই ইচ্ছা ছিল বাংলাদেশে এবার যাওয়া হবে অগস্টে। আহ, যেতে পারিনি, কিন্তু আশা করি একদিন আমাদের বেশি দূরে না যে
না,
আপনাদের
আসবেই।
মাঝে আমি থাকতে পারবো এবং সামনে সামনে পরিচয় হবে মিশুক তোমার সাথে, আম, এবং আলামের সাথে আবার দেখা হবে।
না মানে ক্যাথরিনকে
আমি সেটাই আশা করছি।
আমাদের বিশদ বাংলা বিস্তারে অনেকবার বলেও আনতে পারিনি, তার নানা ব্যস্ততা থাকতো সবসময়। যাই হোক, অন্তত মানে ভার্চুয়ালি আনতে পারলাম। তো ক্যাথরিনের কিন্তু এখনো অনেক স্বপ্ন আছে, সে তারেকের যে বাড়িটা, তারেকের বাড়ি
যে উনি আসছেন,
হ্যাঁ, সেখানে সে করবে একটা ফিল্ম ইনস্টিটিউট বা এই ধরনের একটা খুব আর্কাইভ, মিউজিয়াম, এই জাতীয় জিনিস করার প্ল্যান কিন্তু অলরেডি আছে।
সেটা আমাদের একটা ইচ্ছা আছে, দীর্ঘদিনের ইচ্ছা আছে।
ফলে তাকে আসতেই হবে, মানে তাকে বাংলাদেশে আসতেই, বাংলাদেশি তার আলটিমেট গন্তব্য, আলটিমেট ডেস্টিনেশন।
আমাদের ভুলে যাওয়া উচিত না যে আমার একটা ছেলে আছে, যে তার বাবার মাতৃভূমি চিনতে হবে, তার বাংলা ভাষাও জানতে হবে, অনেক কিছু আসলে তার ইচ্ছা হবে। আমার মনে হয় একটু বড় হলে তখন তারও একটা বিশেষ আগ্রহ হবে বাংলাদেশের সম্পর্কে আরো বেশি জানতে। এই বয়সে এখনো কম্পিউটার গেমস ছাড়া তেমন কিছু জানে না, কিন্তু আমি জানি যে আর একটু বয়স হলে তখন তার সে অবশ্যই অনেক কিউরিয়াস, অনেক কিছু জানতে চায় তার বাবা সম্পর্কে। এমনকি সে তার গত বছরে তার সোশ্যাল স্টাডিজ ক্লাসে ওখানে একটা প্রেজেন্টেশন করেছে তার বাবার উপরে, একটা স্লাইড শো করেছে তার বাবার জীবন যাত্রার উপরে। অনেক গবেষণা করেছে, অনেকগুলো ছবি সংগ্রহ করেছে, আমিও হেল্প করেছি তাকে।
ছেলে কি কাছে আছে এখন?
ছেলে সাথে নাই, আমার মনে হয় সে বাইরে গেছে কোথাও। আমি এতক্ষণ
বড় হয়ে গেছে, 11 বছর বয়স। সেই দিন
না, তার কাজিন দুজন আসছে, তো তাদের সাথে বোধহয় বাইরে বেড়াতে গেছে।
ক্যাথরিনের ভাই এসছে এখন আর কি। হ্যাঁ, তো ভাই সাথে বাচ্চারাও আসছে এখানে। আচ্ছা, তো না, ক্যাথরিন যখন আসবে তাকে অবশ্যই আমরা চট্টগ্রাম নিয়ে আসবো। ক্যাথরিন মন্ট্রিয়েলে যেমন আমার বাড়িতে গিয়েছিলেন মনে আছে বোধহয়, তখন আমার মাও ছিল, মা রান্না করে খাইয়েছিল সন্ধ্যার সময়, আমরা একসঙ্গে খুব সুন্দর একটা আড্ডা দিয়েছেন। হ্যাঁ, সেটাই। তো আমার মা এখন নেই, মা বিদায় নিয়েছে, কিন্তু আমরা আছি, আমরা তোমাকে আপ্যায়ন করতে পারবো আশা করি। মিশুকরা আছে, সবাই আছে। সো আমরা শেষ করবো। শেষ করার আগে আমি লাইভে কিছু মন্তব্য এসে জাস্ট তোমাকে পড়ে শোনাই, তোমার জানার জন্য। আতিকুর রহমান একজন, উনি অস্ট্রেলিয়া থেকে দেখছেন, উনি লিখছেন যে আজকের আয়োজনটি খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, অশেষ ধন্যবাদ প্রিয় আলম খোরশেদ ভাই। সাইফ শাহিন উনি লিখছেন ভালো লাগছে। আতিকুর আরো একটি লিখেছে যে ক্যাথরিন চমৎকার বাংলা বলেন, তাই বলছি তিনি যদি বাংলা বলতেন আরো হৃদয়গ্রাহী হতো। আলমগীর হক স্বপন, ইউ নো আলমগীর, রাইট? আলমগীর ফরিদুল হক, our friend in
Yeah.
the he is based in UK now, বার্মিংহামে
আচ্ছা
আছে।
আচ্ছা
ও লিখেছে, তারেক ওদের সবার খুব ক্লোজ ছিল সে। ক্যাথরিন মাসুদকে শুভেচ্ছা। শর্মিলা রয় পোমো, শি ইজ ফ্রম শান্তিনিকেতন, উনি দীর্ঘদিন ফ্রান্স ছিলেন, শান্তিনিকেতন থেকে তিনি লিখেছেন যে একজন সাহসিনী নারী, নমস্কার জানালাম আর কি।
নমস্কার।
মেরিন নাজনীন, বহু অজানা তথ্য জানলাম, খুবই ভালো লাগলো। আলম হোসেন স্যারকে আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ। তিনি আবারও লিখেছেন বাংলাদেশের চলচ্চিত্র নির্মাতাদের এই অনুষ্ঠানে আনলে আশা করি ভালো হবে। তারা আসেনি, বাট আশা করি লাইভে অনেকেই দেখছেন, আমি কয়েকজনের নাম দেখেছি, ফৌজিয়া and others. Hopefully they will watch the YouTube video we have, we can share it and in many different other fora. মেরিনা আরো লিখেছেন খুব ভালো অনুষ্ঠান হচ্ছে, জয় বাংলা, জয় বঙ্গবন্ধু। তিনি লিখেছেন চাঁদগাতে বসে এমন আন্তর্জাতিক মান অনুষ্ঠান দারুণ। কায়েস চৌধুরী উনি লিখেছেন শুভেচ্ছা। মিস্টার হান্নান উনি আছেন যুক্ত। মেরিন নাজনীন লিখেছেন আকামা মাসুদ ভাই ধন্যবাদ। এই হলো মন্তব্য আমাদের লাইভে। তুমি যদি এদের উদ্দেশ্যে কিছু বলতে চাও। আচ্ছা, আমি যারা যারা অন্তত লাইক দিয়েছে আমি বলে রাখি। সন্দীপন গাঙ্গুলি কলকাতা থেকে, মানে হিজ এ ফিল্ম এনথুসিয়াস্ট, হিজ এ রানস এ ফিল্ম গ্রুপ অলসো অন ফেসবুক। এখানে আছেন Shaila Sharmin Shati, fine artist, Mainul Islam Paul, another artist, Tanzil Tushi is a fine artist. Fozia Khan, we must have met Fozia আমাদের ডকুমেন্টারি ফিল্ম মেকার, খুব ভালো একজন চলচ্চিত্র বোদ্ধা। রফিক কায়সার আমাদের শিক্ষক এবং বাংলার ইজ এ স্কলার। Joel Mazar, another great poet and editor and translator, he's watching this show. Shilu Mahfuza, Shilu, must have met her.
Yes.
She's my friend,
Yes.
right? শিলুকে দেখেছো তো, নিউ ইয়র্কেও দেখেছো, আমাদের ওখানে মুক্তির গানে, ঢাকা ওখানে নিশ্চয়ই দেখেছো আর কি। হ্যাঁ, she is watching the film also, and that's it. So okay, so আমি তোমার কাছে একটা লাস্ট feeling and reaction চাচ্ছি in terms of this comments in Facebook Live, and finally a closing remark from you.
Thank you, Alam. I want to say thank you again, to you and your team for inviting me here and having this chance to reflect on, many incredible experiences in my life. I feel very privileged to have been able to experience these things and witness these things. আমি মনে করি নিজেকে একটা সাক্ষী, ইতিহাসের সাক্ষী, মানে in a sense, a witness to history, right? Because so many of these things যেগুলো আমাদের ব্যক্তিগত জীবনে গঠিয়েছিল আসলে ইতিহাসের অংশ হয়ে গেছিল এক পর্যায়ে। সেটা আগে থেকে আমরা তো ভাবিনি। আমরা সেই নিউ ইয়র্কের দিন থেকে, সেই ইন্দিরা রোডের পাগলা ঘর থেকে শুরু করে আমরা সেই যাত্রা যখন শুরু হয়ে গেছিল, তখন আমরা চোখে দেখতে পারিনি সামনে আমাদের কি ঘটতে যাবে। But it's been a privilege, right, to be a part of that, to be a part of Bangladesh's story also. বাংলাদেশের জাতির গল্পের একটা অংশ হিসেবে থাকতে, সেটার জন্য আমি কৃতজ্ঞ। I'm grateful for that experience, and I'll be forever grateful for that. বাংলাদেশ আমার মধ্যে বাংলাদেশও একটা বড় অংশ, and I retain that love of the country and its people forever, right? It wasn't just Tarek, right? It was when I married Tarek, I married an entire country, I should say. So I will always be a part of this country. Bangladeshe থাকলে না থাকলেও আমি বাংলাদেশে আছি। আমার মন বাংলাদেশে রয়ে গেছে, ফেলে আসছি ওখানে। So and I hope to be there again soon in person, and to do more work, to do more creations, and to be part again of that vibrant culture and life, which was so much a part of my own for so many years. So thank you again, Alam, for bringing me here to remember those days and to also think about the present and the future as well. Thank you.
অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ ক্যাথরিন। সত্যি তোমার ভেতর দিয়ে আমি ফিরে গিয়েছিলাম সেই দিনগুলোতে। বাংলাদেশের ইতিহাসটাকে আমরা যেন আবার নতুন করে উদযাপন করলাম, যাপন করলাম। এবং আমি জানি তোমার আরো অনেক কিছু করার আছে, অনেক স্বপ্ন তুমি ধারণ করো, তারেকের স্বপ্নগুলো আছে, তোমার নিজের স্বপ্ন আছে, নিজের কাজ আছে। গত 10 বছর আমেরিকার নতুন জীবনের ভিতর দিয়ে আরো অনেক নতুন অভিজ্ঞতা সঞ্চয় করেছে, অনেক উপলব্ধির জায়গাটা তোমার বিস্তারিত হয়েছে। আশা করছি আমরা অদূর ভবিষ্যতে আবারও দেখা হবে এই বাংলাদেশের মাটিতে, তোমার সেই স্বপ্নগুলো নিয়ে, তোমার সেই অসমাপ্ত কাজগুলো নিয়ে, এবং তোমার সবটুকু ভালোবাসা নিয়ে। আমি বিস্তারের পক্ষ থেকে তোমাকে আরো একবার আমাদের অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ, কৃতজ্ঞতা এবং ভালোবাসা ব্যক্ত করছি তোমার জন্য। ভালো থেকো, নিশাদকে ভালো রেখো, যত্ন নিও, এবং তোমার মাকে আমার শ্রদ্ধা জানিও, ভাইকেও, আলফ্রেডকেও আর কি। অনেক অনেক
থ্যাংক
ধন্যবাদ।
ইউ আলান।
হ্যাঁ, ওকে, শুভরাত্রি,
অনেক
টেক কেয়ার,
ধন্যবাদ, শুভরাত্রি।
এবং এই ঝড়টাকে মোকাবেলা করো। আশা করি এই ঝড়টা খুব বিপজ্জনক হবে না। তোমাদের ওই বাড়িতে আমি গেছি, সেলেমে যে বাড়ির কথা বলছো, বেশি একটু নড়বড়ে এবার দেখে এসেছিলাম সেই
না
বাড়িখানা।
না, কিন্তু অনেক বড় বড় গাছ আছে চারিদিকে, গাছগুলো পড়ে যেতে পারে।
গাছগুলো আছে, হ্যাঁ এক্স্যাক্টলি, গাছগুলোই আমাদেরকে বাঁচাবে। আমাদের সেই গাছের আন্দোলন, বৃক্ষরোপণ আন্দোলনে করে যেতে হবে। তো তোমার জন্য অনেক অনেক শুভকামনা রইল। শুভরাত্রি।
শুভরাত্রি, থ্যাংক ইউ।